So I am Joanna Acevedo for West Trade Review. I'm here with Robert Wood Lynn, author of several books, including this fabulous chapbook, How to Maintain Eye Contact from Button Poetry. So Rob, you just released this chapbook in January. Your previous book, Mothman Apologia.
There's no wrong way to say it. You can say apologia, you can say apologia. It all works.
Great. How does this work represent a change from your previous book?
So that's a good question. Most of the chapbook and the collection, like Mothman, were written at the same time. So it's in one way, it's a little less of a change and more of just the luxury of a sorting function. So one of the books was really thematically tight. Like Mothman is grief poems, from the woods. And then that meant that like how to maintain eye contact could be a lot looser. It's a little goofier. Sometimes the poems are funny, and they're like more than anything else, they're about just sort of getting by in New York. So it's nice to have two diametrically opposed structures, and they're on very different publishers. They're in very different styles, and the settings are just polar opposites. And so I don't really feel pigeonholed at all as a writer because I'm kind of like meeting in the middle of all of these sorts of things. I think of Mothman as like a holistic collection, and then Eye Contact I sort of get to think of as a vessel that is like built expressly for the purpose of like carrying my favorite poems I've ever written. And so like my two or three favorite poems are inside of mine are inside of the chapbook.
Which poems would those be so we can look at them?
Um, I think probably my favorite, like the poem that I'm most proud of in the world, is At the Coffee Shop on Rogers, which I think is the second poem.
You read that one at a reading that I went to.
That's, I think, my favorite one to read live. It was published in New Ohio Review at first. And it bounces around the internet periodically. And
It's a good one. Can you talk about the significance of the title, How to Maintain Eye Contact, and what it means to you?
so, probably the thing that I am absolutely worst at in the world is eye contact. And there are reasons for that, like neurological reasons for that are probably pretty obvious to everyone else. So no need to get into them here. But I'm interested in a few things I think that the title invokes. The first is like eye contact is about human connection, which for me is the whole point of poetry and language. Poetry is language at its like absolute essence, and the purpose of language will always be the connection of humans, and so like it kind of functions as a stand-in for language for me. And then I guess the other thing, like maybe the biggest part of it, is that I really like when people put in effort at something that they're really bad at. Like a friend of mine, this is sort of like a silly example of that, but a friend of mine once told me that she's like the thing that she was proudest of in her entire life was like when she was a kid, she practiced foul shots until she could make them, even though she was like she was like tiny and never going to make the basketball team. And it's like, I'm just like obsessed with those moments. Like if there's something that has like a straw, like a completely like out of whack, like upside to effort ratio, like if it's like a Sisyphean task, I'm all about it. And so for me, that's eye contact. Like I'm never going to be good at eye contact. I'm going to try. I put it on the title. I put it in a book because the idea, like no one's ever going to get better at eye contact from reading a book, but there's sort of like the promise of that is intriguing to me.
Yeah, I love that. You kind of addressed this already, because you said that you wrote these books at the same time. But what is the process? How did this book come to be? And how is writing a chapbook different than writing a full-length collection?
That's a good question. I think in a lot of ways, I sort of did the chapbook and the full length backwards, partly because the chapbook came out after the full length, but more that for so many collections, like the full length is like large enough that it can have like many disparate parts, and chapbooks tend to be these tight thematic, like focused on one thing, and my chapbook's like loose and wandering, and my full length was a lot like tighter and specific. So maybe I've done it exactly wrong, which is sort of intriguing for me anyway. But I think as far as like how the chapbook came together, that itself is a little bit of a wild story because I wrote 80% of it in Catherine Barnett's workshop at NYU. And I normally have a pretty low hit rate with poems. Like I write a lot of poems to get one or two good ones. Uh, but this class was like one of those like lightning in a bottle. So this is back in 2019, and it was my first semester at NYU, and it was this lightning in a bottle class where like it was just a ton of incredible poets bringing incredible poems, and really incisive feedback, and they created this like loop where like everyone was just getting better and better and better in this like moment. And it couldn't have lasted forever, but I mean we had Bernard Ferguson in that class, we had
I
Sarah
love them.
Mel, Hannah Matheson, and everybody else in the class. I mean, across the board, fantastic writers. Those three are three of my favorite writers in the world. And I just like the energy of the class it lined up in a way that like everything that was coming out that I was writing like hung together in like a loose energetic, like there was an energy to it that was just like working. And at the end of the semester, we had to sort of as our capstone turn in a chapbook, but I like worked with Catherine on mine a lot at the end, and at the end it was like, hey, this is actually maybe a publishable thing. And then I sent it off to Button, and they were really really pleased with it. And I made a lot of edits since then. I traded poems back between the chapbook and the full length, and was able to kind of like sort out like the Woods poems go here, the Franco Harry poems go here, which was really freeing. But yeah, it came together super fast.
Actually, that goes right into my next question, which is that this book is very much based in New York City. So, can you talk about how the city is significant in this work?
That's perceptive and a good question, because like I feel a very different energy in New York to where I grew up. I've been in New York in one way or another for almost a decade now. But I grew up in like a small town, or like outside of a small town. And so they are just completely different places. And I am a different person in each place. And I write differently in each place. And I don't think I can walk around New York without sort of feeling a little bit like I'm stalking the ghost of Frank O'Hara. I really recommend Brad Gooch's City Poet, as like his biography of him. It's fantastic for anyone who's interested in Frank O'Hara, and I kind of think anyone who writes poems should be interested in Frank O'Hara. But like O'Hara is like talky, and he's goofy, and he's funny, and he's deathly serious, like all at the same time. He's like quotidian and romantic and dramatic, like in one poem, right? It's like Lana Turner has collapsed, and also like Alana, we love you, get up. Um, and so it's hard not to write poems in New York without feeling a little bit like I'm puppeted by him. Um, and maybe it's not so much that maybe it's not that so much as that like O'Hara really tapped into the energy that is just running underneath us all the time in this city. And um, like this is a special place, right? There's like a lot of absurdity to living in New York. And it's a lot of, I mean, the glamour is like a combination of like, there's a ton of glamour here, but also you're kicking a rat like as you walk down the street. And, there's the anonymity of like being surrounded by people, but like no one knows you at all. And it's just like, there's the collective joy in the struggle to just be here. And also I think that there's like one thing that O'Hara captures really well is the simultaneous like permanent insider and outsider status. You're always both in New York City. I love that. I love that so much. And O'Hara didn't invent those things. Like I think those are New York specific, but he captured them. They still exist, right? Like, and I like those moments for me function in a specific way. And right, like, and I there's a certain my writing's going to be informed by like the like speed walking while eating a dollar slice on Sixth Avenue or whatever. Like it's just part of what the city does to people.
Yeah, definitely. I'm from here, so I am completely unaware of all of this. We just kind of exist here.
Oh,
But no,
amazing.
it's great to hear someone talk about the city that way, because I don't even think about it. But I think this goes right into my next question, which is, something that I picked up on in this collection is sort of this theme of loneliness, and I wrote about this in my review, but specifically loneliness among crowds, which I think you just touched on a little bit also. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that's perceptive. Loneliness, I think, is the absence of, we think about loneliness a lot as the absence of people, but I think it's actually the absence of like a human connection that you want. And so it might not necessarily be solitude so much as like being surrounded by people you don't feel understood by or can't connect with, or like you want who would understand you, but there's something preventing
Like
you.
the barista who you have the misconnection with the tea bags.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Where it's just that like there's like a series of artifices in that poem. And there's like so many artifices in life that are like keeping people like politely interacting, but not actually connecting. Um, and that to me is like deeply um both dispiriting, but also sort of like interesting, right? There's that there's a video that went viral recently of like a single human brain cell just like reaching out for connection, and it like and I did not know that brain cells worked that way, but it's like literally just like grasping for whatever's nearby, and that to me I think is the a little bit of the experience of like loneliness in a crowd. Um and it will just be one of my writing obsessions forever.
Pivoting a little bit, you managed to bring irony and humor to like incredibly serious topics. I'm thinking of the one that I loved was the one about the guys reading the book about horses, and then you look it up and it actually is a book about horses. And I think a lot of your titles also are very funny. Lying specifically to children, that one's really good. Can you talk about humor in your poetry?
Oh, that makes me feel good because if you ever try to write a joke into a poem, there's like always the deathly fear that people won't get the joke or won't find it funny,
Yeah.
and then you will like be asked to like explain like very straight face like the serious moving thing that was mostly a joke. But I I love humor in poetry. I think the difference between a poem and a joke is how far you bury the punchline. um like structurally they function the same. Like a poem is a machine made of language that runs on surprise, and a joke is a machine made of language that runs on surprise. And you know at like at its most base level, like a joke just needs to get to the laugh, but a really good joke gets you to the laugh by also revealing something about the world. And at its most base level, a poem needs to, reveal something to you to change you. But like, I think a really good poem can get there through the process of also making you laugh. Also, like it lowers, if you laugh, it lowers your guard down. Like you put the shield down, and then there's like a space to be reached a little bit easier, because you're no longer like the skeptical approach that we all. Eileen Miles came by the Writers' House at NYU recently and said something that I thought was really interesting, which is that like the thing that people hate about poetry is the pretense that it matters. And so a joke is a great way to disarm that, right? Like people, once you can hit people with like once you get people away from like, oh my gosh, I'm approaching this like deathly serious poem that is like trying to tell me like how pretentious can it be to write a poem. There's no more pretentious thing in the world. And once you can kind of like cut inside that with humor in some way, which like functions the same way as what a good, like what a metaphor does. Um, so if I could, I don't have the emotional constitution to write all funny poems, nor am I that funny, but I do think my favorite poems are usually mostly funny poems, like Chessie Normile and Harold Lindsay Bird, two of the funniest poets whose work I've ever read, and I'm just like, those are as good. Like I'll put those poems up against anyone else's in the world. So
Yeah, definitely. I love that answer. Also, I love that Eileen Miles quote.
Yeah, they're
That's
they're just they're just the best.
yeah, they're amazing. So we're wrapping up now. And I know we talked about this, but so you're writing a novel.
Yeah, I am. So,
What's next? Here's the what's next question.
yeah. So, I mean, who knows? Like, the only more pretentious thing than writing a poem and standing up in front of it and reading it to other people is to tell people randomly that you're writing a novel. So I
Oh,
try not to, but that is what I'm doing now. And right now it's about apologies and state level bureaucracy, which isn't exactly
sounds promising.
yeah, it doesn't exactly make for a sexy beach read, but I'm really excited about it. Um, the the structure is a little bit sort of Canterbury Tales ish, where it's just people standing in line telling each other stories. So it's a little bit of a frame story, but and then I also have a second full length manuscript of poems coming together. Or I keep thinking it's together, and then I like take it apart and restitch it together, like a horrible taxidermied cat that is
Oh,
being like continuously reposed. I'm working on that with
weird
Terrence
metaphor,
Davis.
Rob.
Yeah, I know that was dark, uh, uh, but it's been a wild ride. Like I keep kind of like pulling the guts of it apart and then just like restructuring it to try to do something else. And who knows? I may end up having to throw the whole thing out. But it's been fun to write. It's been like a real challenge.
Yeah. All right, great. Thank you so much for being here. I have one bonus question for
Oh,
you,
perfect.
which is why are there so many cats in this book?
Oh my gosh. Uh,
I'm surprised they're not on the cover and it's raccoons. I'm so genuinely surprised.
so I think so. I didn't realize this, but I have a lot of birds in the full length collection.
Yes, you do. You do.
And I got asked about them a couple times, and one interview, I think actually might have been West Trade Review, um, suggested that they were a metaphor for freedom, which is like, that is perceptive, but maybe not overtly intended. Um, and I'm both like an obsessive cat person and an obsessive like bird person. Uh, and that to me is funny because those two things are forever in conflict. Um, and like now that I think about it, the cats in the chapbook keep appearing as bird killers. Like at least twice they kill birds. Um,
Interesting.
and so I don't know that that was intentional. It's probably pretty easy to draw a tension between like if birds are freedom, then cats are comfort. But honestly, the truth is, I just think about cats a lot. I like cats, so they're gonna pop up in whatever I write because I like cats. So
Okay. Thank you so much for being here, Rob.
I appreciate that, Joanna.